Are romantic relationships transactional?
Well, it depends on what you mean by romantic relationships. So let's be clear. When people say romantic, it's really just, in most cases, a euphemism for sexual. So, are sexual relationships transactional? Yes. Are romantic relationships transactional? Not necessarily. But then we have to get into what romantic love is, which is very different from, let's say, anything else. It's its own beast. And part of what makes romantic relationships work is that they are unrequited, that they are obstructive, and that they tend towards tragedy and failure. Romantic relationships have as their unconscious destination dissolution. So in that sense, romantic relationships, i.e. relationships that are dominated with the ideal and the idea of romantic love, are not necessarily transactional. They can actually be very one-sided. But in anything that remotely approximates a healthy adult relationship, yes, those relationships are transactional. In fact, the fundamental premise of my upcoming book, The Value of Others, is that relationships are the medium in which value is transacted. People need things, and they want things, and they need and want things from other people. Other people represent a potential solution to that need and want, but they also present a potential problem because they might not give it, right? So the problem of other people is a problem that all individuals have to learn how to navigate. In general, there are three primary strategies for dealing with the problems of other people. You can move toward, you can move against, and you can move away. Move toward is basically like, let's enter into a relationship. Move against is, I'm going to beat you, and move away is, I'm going to become so independent and self-reliant that I don't need you. So those two generally don't have to do with relationships. The move toward solution or strategy does have to do with relationships. So one of the most enduring solutions that human beings have hit upon to get what they want and need from others is to enter into relationships. Where no value can be transacted, no relationship is possible. Like if we can't come to terms for what you get in return for what I get, we're both going to go our separate ways. And if no value is transacted, we can't possibly say that we're in a relationship. And this is also why you can't necessarily say that romantic love is a relationship, because it's certainly possible for one person to love another person who doesn't even know that that person exists. That's actually kind of like the romantic ideal is, let's say, Cyrano de Bergerac, who's in love with Roxanne, who doesn't even know that he exists as a lover because of his nose and whatnot. But we believe in the depth and richness and sincerity of Cyrano's love regardless. But we wouldn't say that Cyrano's actually in a relationship with Roxanne. Not really. That would be ridiculous. So for a relationship to actually happen, there has to be a transaction of value.
Is it better to love someone or to be loved by someone?
Well, let's talk about love. Love is a word that is very often misunderstood in our culture, and it's one single word that can mean many, many, many different things. And I have examined love extensively through my life. And this is because, just as a little personal side note, love didn't always feel like love when it was communicated to me. In my life, I've been told I love you many, many times by many different people. But only rarely did I love you mean I love you. Often, I love you meant don't leave me. Or I love you meant you need to believe me. Or I love you meant, after all I've done for you. I love you can mean many, many different things, and only one of them is I love you, okay? So it took me a long time to tease out why love didn't always feel like love when I was growing up. And I've had to look very, very carefully at that emotion. And what I've discovered is that most of the experience of love can go by another name. And what I would like to suggest is that the core of love, the essence of love, is that which has no other name. So for instance, there is everything that has to do with like sexuality and passion, and ardor, and interest, and lust, and limerence, and all of that. All of that has a name, and you can certainly feel all of those things without feeling love, and you can feel love without those things, because I would say that love is not those things. By the same token, there's a whole cluster of emotions around like tenderness, and gentleness, and kindness, and deference, and devotion. But I think that you can do those things and not love someone, and you can love someone and not do those things. So again, I think we need to be able to separate love from that as well. And so in this process, I started to look at all the different things that love could be, all the different emotional experiences and cognitive components, and I began to see that most of these things can be and do exist independently of love. But there was only one thing that I found that doesn't have another name, and I think that that has to be the core essence, the core experience of love. It's necessary and sufficient in the sense that if you feel this, you feel love. You don't need anything else. And what I say is that love is the humiliated self exultant. Love is the humiliated self exultant. What love cares about more than anything else is the good of the other. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, that means on some level that the lover can't reasonably expect to be in a relationship with the person he or she loves unless that lover decides that that relationship is reasonably the best possible thing for the loved one, which it probably isn't. This is why the romantic hero par excellence is like Rick Blaine in Casablanca, who loves Ilsa and at the end of the movie puts her on a plane with another man because he understands that that's what's best for her and what's best for actually the world and the social movement that he's now participating in again for the first time in years. He loved Elsa, so he surrendered her. He gave her up because that's what was best for her. You can only demand a relationship with a loved one if you are reasonably the best thing for that loved one, which is very unlikely. The humiliated self-exultant is almost like a positive embarrassment. It's almost like, here I am. I've shed all of my armor. I don't care if you think I'm a fool. I don't care if you mock me. I don't care if you spit on me and step on me. I don't care if you give me the crown of thorns. You see where this is going? It's like in the story of humanity, potentially, the greatest example of love is in the story of the historical figure of Christ, who is willing to suffer any ignominy, any humiliation out of his love for man. Relationships need things like boundaries and rules and definitions. Love doesn't give a shit about any of that stuff. Love doesn't love where it's allowed. That's ridiculous. Love doesn't need rules to contain it. It's like relationships need those things, right? So a lot of what people actually traffic with is relationship stuff. Love is hard. Like love is not a soft, cuddly thing. Love is an invitation to self-transcendence. It's an invitation to become more than yourself and to voluntarily make sacrifices for the good of a loved one. That's not a cozy thing. And to actually love, you will be called upon to make those sacrifices. And the larger the sacrifice, the larger the love. So to go back to your question, when people tell me that they want to find love, I think, why? Do you know what love is? Love will destroy you. You will not be the person that you are today when you start to love. You will have to grow up. You will have to think of something more than yourself. Love is not a warm, cozy feeling. Love is found in solitude. It's found in defeat. It's found in the gutters. Because it's in those moments where the lover feels most self-satisfied with his or her sacrifice. So, is it better to be loved or to love? I think that it's a very good thing to learn how to love. I think that's something that every person would benefit from experiencing, but it is not what people think it is. Love will turn you inside out. It will destroy who you think you are in the same way that the cocoon destroys the caterpillar. What happens in there isn't pretty. The caterpillar actually gets liquefied. It's like a slurry in there for days or weeks. And to that caterpillar, the cocoon is a tomb. It does not have an understanding or a conceptualization of what a butterfly is, in my opinion. It goes in there to die. And it goes in there to die without hope, because the caterpillar never emerges. But what comes out of that is something that I think no entity that goes into the cocoon can predict. And once you make the decision to sacrifice your own happiness and well-being voluntarily for the loved one, you find out who you really are. You find out a lot about yourself, because that's when the rubber really hits the road. People can believe all kinds of things about how generous they are, how virtuous they are. It's like, if you love until the relationship ends, did you really love it all? That's a non-rhetorical question. Because if you just love until the end of the relationship, what I would suggest is that you loved the benefit that you accrued from that relationship. The attention, the dates, the cuddles, the sex, the vacations, the escape from loneliness, the opportunity to get your parents off your back about when you're going to get married and have kids. I mean, like, people enter into relationships for all kinds of reasons.
Those reasons you just listed are the reasons that that's what people are looking for. Most people, it seems.
Yeah. And love is not about wedding cakes and marriages. It's not about Valentine's Day and flowers and candies and chocolates. It's not about that moony limerence where all you can think about in some weird, positive, psychotic obsession, the loved one. Love is grounded. It's like the giving tree, the Shel Silverstein story, where the tree just keeps giving more and more of itself. That's love. And it ends up a stump. But it also ends up a story in the mind of that boy that he will never forget. So, on some level, the sacrifice of love will take everything from you, but it will also, on some level, make you immortal. It will make you immortal in the lives, the minds, and the hearts of the people that you did that for. And that's the surest, it's not a sure thing, but it's the surest way of guaranteeing your existence past your physical life that I think that most people will ever encounter.
Respect is something that young men are taught to have when they're dealing with women.
Okay.
And I heard you say once, one of my, I think I've watched every video on your channel, my favorite line from all of them. You want to say it or should I say it?
I think I know what it is.
It's regarding sex.
Mm-hmm.
What do women never say?
Well, they never say, oh,
after sex, what does a woman never say?
oh, wow, you respected the shit out of me.
That's,
Doesn't happen, right?
never.
So this is in the context of the fact that respect tends to mean different things to men and women. And if you're like me, then you were raised from a very young age to respect all women. And that leads to a number of unfortunate and unintended negative consequences in the sexual marketplace. And they're negative consequences for women as well, because it makes it harder for women to get what they want from men. Okay? So let's talk about this. One of the components of, so first of all, because let's address the issue that usually gets the most pushback when I talk about respect. Because again, just like love, respect can mean many, many different things. I'm not talking about respect in the sense of like basic human dignity, where it's like, yes, I believe that all human beings are worthy of and deserving of some baseline consideration. I'm not using respect in that way. I'm using respect in the way that most men use it, which is an acknowledgement of performative excellence. You have to do something respectable to earn respect. If we're talking about basic human dignity, you don't have to earn that, right? We're talking about earning respect. And respect has to do with the acknowledgement of superior ability. And it puts the person being respected, at least temporarily, on a higher playing field than the respectator, as it were. The person being respected is on the court. The respectator is in the audience. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Now, this is problematic in the sexual marketplace for a couple of reasons. One is that women have, it's problematic in many respects for the woman to be on a pedestal. So one of the concepts that I talk about a lot on my channel is the balance of attraction, which is very simply that it's not possible for two people to like each other exactly the same amount, which means that one person must always like the other person more, and the other person must like the other person less. These things change. They generally don't change like this, but they kind of, the gap can go up and down. One person is generally the adorer, and the other person is the adored, okay? The person up here on the pedestal is the adored. Now, there are pros and cons to both of these positions. It's not like one is better than the other. And in fact, most people, contrary to popular belief, want to be here. They want to be the adorer. What? Exactly, because the adorer gets to be with the one they love. And there's no greater victory in popular culture than that. And when you're with the one that you love, you get to experience the panoply of human emotions that comes with that. And not even all the good ones. Like, it's the adorer who waits on tenterhooks for the phone to buzz. It's the adorer who is thrilled to the gills when the adored is coming over for dinner. It's the adored who flies into a temporary fit of despondency when the adored has to cancel plans. The adorer is the one who gets to have the emotional experience. On the other hand, the adored gets to be loved by the one that they're with. Not nearly as emotionally of compelling a situation. And the fact of the matter is that while most people want the emotional component of a relationship, in my experience, it's more important for the woman to have that than the man. It's been said that you can make a woman feel anything except bored, and I think that there's some truth to that. And if a man insists that he is going to put the woman on the pedestal, it robs her of the opportunity to be the adorer, because two people cannot like each other exactly the same amount. They can't occupy the same place.
It's a recipe for disaster.
It is. It also means if he's looking up at her, that she's looking down at him. And that's not what women want. No little girl grows up dreaming, well, one day I want a guy that I can look down on. Right? They're looking for a prince. They want to look up. They want to feel small in his arms. Women date and mate hypergamously. They want men who are older, more successful, more high status, higher earning, more intelligent, more capable than they are. And why wouldn't they? That's to their benefit. Otherwise, they have a liability on their hands, don't they? Like, that's not necessarily what most women dream about. And when men, unfortunately, put women in that position when they pedestalize them. And they pedestalize women when they respect them in that way. Because respect means you did something amazing. You are higher than me. You are better than me. And one of the key components to respect is that sexuality is completely inappropriate in respectful situations. Like if you were at a graduation ceremony, if you were at a funeral, if you were at a decoration ceremony in the military, any situation that is conferring respect and honor on any person, man or woman, sexualization of that situation is entirely inappropriate. Entirely inappropriate. It shouldn't even be like hinted at. It would be disgusting in the context of honor and respect. And so what a lot of guys who grew up hearing respect women, to them, what that means is completely withdrawing any of my sexual intent, any of my sexuality, even denying myself as a sexual being in relation to and in the presence of women. Now, there's a time and a place, right? Like, it's I've experienced this, and so I have some sympathy with women. It's not comfortable, it's not pleasant to be sexualized by someone that you don't want to be sexualized by. I get it. And it's inappropriate when people sexualize relationships or situations in which that component or dimension of experience is best left out. But there is a time and a place for sexuality. And that's generally in sexual relationships, right? And the issue is that when men are trying to make something happen with a woman, to ask her out, or they've gone on the first, second, third date, and they still haven't made a move, they still haven't expressed sexual intent, they've hidden their desire for this woman, the woman is confused, the man gets relegated to the friend zone again, he can't understand why, okay? So there is a time and a place to appropriately communicate sexual energy as a man to a woman. And you cannot do that at the same moment that you're respecting someone. It's not possible. One of the, this is an interesting idea. I'd like to make an episode about this in the future. It's called in the literature the Madonna whore complex. Have you heard about that? Mm-hmm. Okay. The issue is that when a man starts to love a woman, or when the woman has his children and he sees her primarily as the mother of his children as opposed to his wife or his lover, he can lose a lot of the sexual interest and attraction for her, which usually harms their marriage or relationship and doesn't feel good for the woman at all, right? And the issue is that it's actually really hard to fuck someone that you love. As a man, it's very, very hard. Like, fucking requires some aggression. It requires some objectification. It requires some compartmentalization. You have to you can't fuck like a whole person with all of her hopes and dreams and feelings and the complexities of her dimension and all of your positive feelings. It's like what you're not going to grab her hair and slap her ass and, you know what I'm saying? It's like those two impulses, they can't coexist in a man's mind at the same time. And so on some level, for men to retain their sexuality with the women that they're involved with, they have to be able to like switch that on and off. They have to be able to like still compartmentalize that this, in this moment, is not the love of my life, is not the mother of my children, is not my soulmate. In this moment, this is a hot piece of ass that I'd like to have a slice of. And that is what motivates the natural, vital male sexual impulse. And wanting to have that kind of emotional connection, that's a failure of intersexual understanding. That's more of what women want. But that actually often has the opposite consequence on men's sexuality. The more we get emotionally involved with you, the harder it is to fuck you.
Human relationships are fascinating, aren't they?
God is laughing at us from beyond the clouds because he really couldn't have made men and women more different in this regard.
I'll ask this question for men and then for women. What is men's greatest enemy in terms of romantic relationships?
Well, I made an episode about this. I said that man's greatest enemy is cowardice. Cowardice. And I didn't just say fear. I said cowardice, which is a bit of a loaded term, but I think that is good because hopefully that pisses guys off in the right way and motivates action. And there's a lot of cowardice relative to women that men are evincing in today's day and age. There's cowardice from just basic approach anxiety, which is I'm so afraid of being rejected, which is just information. It's just a word.
Why is rejection from a woman, a very attractive woman, such a problem for men?
Okay, well, because the reason why rejection from a woman is a problem for men is because the unconscious, deep communication involved in that rejection is I do not think that you are worth fucking, which means, because we all know what fucking leads to is children, is so that I don't think that you should reproduce. That is the subtext of a sexual rejection. I don't think that you deserve to reproduce. Which basically means I think that you should go extinct. Like, we've had enough of that. So let's just quietly let that fade away because the world doesn't need any more of that.
You're amazing.
Okay? So that's a very deep evolutionary hit, and I don't think there's any way out of that. You can get over, and you should get over, rejection and your approach anxiety as a man by learning that ultimately rejection is just information. Do you want to play? No. Okay. Do you want to play? Yes. Let's go play. It's like you can examine how children engage with each other on the playground. One kid's got a ball, and he goes up to, hey, you want to play ball? No, I want to play soldiers. He doesn't like fall to pieces because this one kid doesn't want to play ball with him. He just finds someone, he keeps going around until someone will play with them. And then he plays. It's a piece of cake. You know, we don't have to take things more personally than they have to be. But that is something that most men have to get over. And so there is a sort of cowardice about, well, it's going to hurt if I try and it fails. It's going to hurt to be rejected. It's scary to approach a woman. What if she becomes offended? A lot of guys these days are concerned that they're going to have their interactions recorded and put on the internet and be outed as sexual harassers or sexual predators. I always ask them if this has ever happened to them or if they've ever seen this happen. I haven't gotten an affirmative answer from any of the guys that are afraid of this, but it's like it's in the vibe of the present moment, right? We know that men get canceled for inappropriate behavior, that most of that inappropriate behavior has to do with some form of sexualization of women. And men are just extremely cautious about that, because who wants to wake up to find 10 million people angry at him? So there's cowardice there. There's cowardice, like I mentioned in the last talk, when a woman starts to display negative emotion, that the person folds and says, okay, well, I'll take it back, or I won't go golfing with the guys, or no, you're the only one. Yeah, of course, I love you, and I was planning to propose the whole time. When the guy concedes in the face of an uncomfortable emotional interaction with a woman, that's a form of cowardice, in my opinion. And it's a cowardice born of his unwillingness or his inability to accept and tolerate his own emotions. So good news, guys, that's something that you can actually get over. And the other form of cowardice, I think, that's rampant in our society is the fear of assuming leadership, especially in intimate relationships. The fact of the matter is that the vast majority of women don't want to be equal partners. That's not the female fantasy, is I want an equal partner. That's kind of a male fantasy, is that we'll go 50-50. Back, you'll be my partner, I got your back, you got mine. And it's like, we're going to take it on. It's like men can do that with other men. But that's not really the female romantic fantasy. Like I said, they want the prince. They want somebody higher. Why do they go after somebody who is higher status and has an extrapolated lifestyle, etc.? Because it could be of benefit to them. And the benefit is asymmetrical. In fact, if a woman doesn't stand to significantly benefit from a relationship, you can make the argument that it's not worth the opportunity cost of choosing that man for a relationship over all of her other options, assuming that she has other options, which she generally does.
Before I do the female version of that question I just asked, do men always pay?
Yeah, men always pay to engage with women, but the more that she likes you, the greater the discount. And that's fair, because if she doesn't like you, then she has to be compensated in other ways for the opportunity cost of choosing you over the men that she really likes. This is why with her toxic ex, she might be okay with the fact that he never wanted to give her an exclusive commitment, or he was seeing other women, or etc., etc. She, for whatever reason, really, really liked that guy, was very highly attracted to him. And so she made her sexual opportunity available to him at a radical discount relative to better men who she might be less attracted to.
And when a guy is paying a lot to his woman, that can typically mean that she's not.
Yeah, I tell men that they should be very cautious about paying these high price tags, because to the extent that men only really want to pay for women who authentically and enthusiastically want to be with them, well, the more they're paying, the less likely they're getting what they want. Ultimately, like, the highest test of attraction or love from a woman is when she says something like, I just want to be with you. And I don't need the ring. I don't need the wedding. I don't need this, that, or the other. I'm just happy being with you. That's the highest form of love in a woman, is, if possible, to remain in the presence of the loved one. I talk about that on my channel.
Mm-hmm. Your channel is great. Your YouTube channel, which is called
Psych Hacks.
Psych Hacks.
Yeah.
PSYCHACKS.
Yeah, psychology hacks, psych hacks. Yeah, that was the idea.
It's a great channel. So what is the female, what is women's biggest enemy in terms of romantic relationships?
Well, women's greatest enemy is pride. So pride is the master sin, according to some medieval theologian. Who is that? I think it was Meister Eckhart said that pride was the master sin. And pride can manifest in many, many ways to women's detriment in the modern sexual marketplace. In particular, it manifests in certain ways. In the attraction phase, it manifests as a disgust or an offense at men's sexual attraction. I know that there's a lot of women who really, 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 really want to be seen and acknowledged as more than just a sexual object. I get that. And that might happen after you become a sexual object. I wish that that weren't the case, but for the vast majority of men, that's how it works.
It does work that way.
Again, God is laughing. For women, sex is often the fruit of the tree. As a guy, you got to plant the seed, and then you got to water it, and then you got to pull some weeds that grow up, and then you got to be patient, and then there's the flower, and then the flower transforms into a fruit, which ripens, and then boom, oh, I'm ready, I'm all yours. For men, sex is the seed. A lot of guys don't even understand women if you like us until you fuck us. That's where the rubber hits the road, is what are you willing to give us in the bedroom? And if you say that you like us and you're such a good guy and you see that there's a future for this and you want us to wait, that doesn't make a lot of sense to us. And this is why I often say that women and men do the right things with the wrong people. We can talk about that later if you'd like.
Sure.
But the idea here is that women find that distasteful, that men are attracted to them. I've had that experience on dating apps. Well, I would comment on a woman's appearance, pay a compliment, and she would be offended. Like, this interaction is off to a great start, but it's like, my personality is even better. It's like, well, your personality didn't fucking come through in your pictures. It's like, what do you expect?
I think what women need to understand, and men as well, is for men, sexual attraction comes first, and that can lead to an emotional connection, whereas for women, emotional connection comes first, and then that leads to a sexual attraction.
Yeah. It's like I said in the last episode, where sexual opportunity is the Trojan horse to get into the city. It's like women might want the emotional connection and the commitment and the resources and the lifestyle, what have you. All of that is on the other side of those walls. And how are you going to get those big fucking walls to open? They're going to swing open effortlessly at the invitation of a compelling sexual opportunity. So you have this ace in the hole. You have this trump card that you can play functionally whenever you want, but you're like disdain to use it, which is...
Women do.
Yeah, which is baffling to me. But that could be part of the pride. It's like, well, I shouldn't have to use that card. It's like, well, I shouldn't have to be successful for you to fuck me, or I shouldn't have to be... I shouldn't have to have game. I shouldn't have to be funny, But that's how it is, sweetheart. That's just the realities of the game of meeting and dating. So that's one way that pride can get in their way. Another way is that they have a sort of contempt for being useful, especially any kind of usefulness that touches on anything traditionally based in historical gender roles, which could be cooking, which could be cleaning, which could be childcare. I know women who... let's talk about this. So I actually did a consultation with a woman on this subject a while back. She had been living with her boyfriend for several years. The boyfriend paid for the entire apartment. I think that he paid for all the food and the lifestyle that they enjoyed. He made a request of her. It's kind of a strange request, but the request apparently was that he asked her to do like every other load of laundry of his. I think it's weird, just like ask her to do the laundry, I would think. But he said, do like half my laundry. And she wouldn't do that. She refused, and she ended that relationship. And I asked her, like, why? Why did you do that? What's so bad about laundry? And she said, well, that's a low value chore. Like, that's something that any woman could do. And I don't want to be just any woman. I want to do the high value stuff. Like, I want to be his business partner, and I want to be his emotional confidant. And I said, well, you're not going to be any of those things now. And she was like, oh. And I'm like, okay, so how much did it cost you to do this? And she had run the numbers. She lived here in San Francisco, and she did the math that after she had to get her own place, and she's now paying for all of her rent and all of her food and all of her utilities, et cetera, et cetera. What she discovered is that, and that ran to probably $4,000 to $5,000 a month. Rent, utilities, food, et cetera, et cetera. So, and to do every other load of laundry would probably take about 2 hours of work a month. And it's not work like you're scrubbing the stains out of the clothes down at the riverfront. It's that you move the clothes from the hamper and then you push the button, and then an hour later the machine tells you to move it over here, you push another button, and then you folding is the hard part, right? So it's probably like maybe 15 minutes of real labor every time you do a load of laundry, twice a month. So that's 30. That woman was getting paid $10,000 an hour to do laundry. But she decided that that was too low value for her. And so now she moved out, she ended that relationship, she's 35, and she got her own place. And now, having to pay for her apartment and her utilities and her food and whatnot, after taxes, she now had, she told me, around $1,500 in discretionary income every month, which translates to, what does that translate to? Let's see, 1,500 divided by 3, that's like $50 a day. So here she is, she's living in San Francisco, and she's working a 40-hour job. It's not really an important job. Like, the world would go on if this job didn't exist at all anywhere on this planet. But what she's going to do is she's going to trade the best hours of her days for the best years of her life to be able to make enough so that next month she can do it again. If you make $50 in discretionary income, you're not going to buy a house ever in the Bay Area. Like, save as much as you want. You get one flat tire on your car, that's half a month's discretionary income. You better not get sick.
If she had ridden it out with this guy, he may have advanced his career, his income. They may have gotten a maid. She'd never have to do anything ever again.
It's certainly possible, right? But the fact of the matter is, and I'm sure that there are other issues in this relationship.
Sure.
But this was, and I believed her, the straw that broke the camel's back that ended that relationship for her is her unwillingness to do laundry in return for everything else that she was potentially getting. It was too low value for her. And now this is her situation. So it doesn't make a lot of economic sense to me, but people have to make their own decisions. So that's it. But I did call her out. In my opinion, that was an example of her pride getting in her own way. And the example I give about this, about the low value activities or services, it's like if you go to a Michelin star restaurant, if you go to French Laundry, and you ask the waiter for a glass of water, the waiter doesn't say, "Monsieur, we do not serve water here. There's only Dom Perignon. This is a high-value restaurant." It's like, that would be absurd, right? It's like, no matter what the fuck you ask for at French Laundry, they're going to get it to you. And that water is going to show up in some sort of like cut crystal glass with an artisanal ice cube from like some virgin mountain spring in Greenland with quadruple filtered water. Because what high value people do is they do everything with class and with great service. And they can transform a simple request like water into the most amazing water I've ever had in my life. So, and that's what makes French Laundry a place like French Laundry, where people will pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars and make reservations months in advance and talk about it for years afterwards. If women were to adapt that kind of mindset, and instead of like certain things are just inherently low value and certain things are just inherently high value, which is not true, they might have more success with respect to getting what they want with men.
Tell me about your views on romance.
Well, romance is a tricky thing. So, romantic love is... Oh, this is a big subject. So, romantic love is not really conducive to successful relationships, like by design. We know that limerence, the experience of, let's say, falling in love, has existed since time immemorial in all kinds of different cultures. But you have to understand that until a certain point in human history, no one really considered that kind of love to be a positive experience. It's like there's a reason the Greeks said that he was pierced by Cupid's dart. Like you were shot. No one thinks being shot is a positive experience that they should go out and get for themselves. Certain cultures thought that being in love brought the lover into an elevated state of reality where their perception might be divinified in some respect. But in general, people who fell in love, it's a fall. It's a fall from grace, it's a fall from sanity, and are generally treated with, let's say, a pitiable indulgence because it's not really their fault. They couldn't help it. They're not in their right mind. But no, not for me, thank you. What changed is that we now, in most parts of the world, consider romantic love not only to be a positive and something that all people should want and seek out, but potentially the most important experience or the most important goal that a human being can aspire to, which is insane. It's totally crazy. It's like basically saying, from the perspective of the Greeks, that the best thing you could possibly be is depressed. Like, the Greeks saw limerence as a mental illness. And within that context, people striving and seeking out romantic love and the one and their soulmate, and it's like seeking out a distortion. It's seeking out a disease. Okay? And what really changed, where this experience was valenced positively, it happened in like 15th century France during something called the Albigensian Crusade, which is a very hard word to say. And it's one of the few times that the Pope declared a holy war on other Catholics. Of course, he called those Catholics, the Cathars and others, heretics. And these Cathars were a sect of Catholics, a sect of Christians who believed certain things about love and marriage. In particular, they believed that people should not get married. Fun fact is that marriage only really became a Catholic sacrament much, much later than people think. Like, it wasn't until around this time, in the 15th century, that marriage became one of the official Catholic sacraments. Before then, it wasn't. In fact, there's a long tradition in Catholicism about not marrying. I mean, the Pope doesn't get married, does he? None of the apostles got married. Jesus didn't get married. Paul talked about how he wishes that all men would be like him, unmarried, etc., etc., etc. And what the Cathars basically said is, this world is a world of imperfection. It's a world of flaw. It's a world of tragedy. Why bind your heart to another mortal creature who will fail you. The only thing that you can trust is God, and we'll meet him in the life beyond, so let's not create any unnecessary attachments here on earth. Interestingly, as a side note, the Catholic rationalization for marriage is almost exactly the same. The Catholic rationalization for marriage is basically like, yes, this is a flawed, imperfect world, and people are sinful and disappointing, and yet through an imitation of Christ, we decide to love them anyway for all of their flaws. And so marriage is actually seen from a very high Catholic spiritual perspective to be an act of, like I was talking about, humble self-sacrifice to love someone who doesn't deserve it. Because who does?
The reason I asked that question, though, you had mentioned once the invention of romance.
Yeah.
Where like the poorer man that couldn't do anything to attract a female would...
Sure. Well, one thing you have to understand is the romantic idea that we even have today is based on the chivalric code. We get the term chivalry from that. And the chivalric code was an informal lifestyle program for Catholic knights who lived in the south of France at that time. And one of the things that every chivalric knight did was pick one lady fair for him to devote all of his quests and all of his jousts and all of his victories to. And he would romanticize her, he would pedestalize her. She was a symbol of the feminine divine. She was in some way an inspiration, an encouragement, an emolument, and she was always married to somebody else. People generally forget that part. But one of the core principles of the chivalric code was the lady fair had to be married to another man. The point here was, at least ideally, this meant that there was this obstruction between the two of them that would prevent the relationship between the knight and the lady fair from ever actually spilling over into overt sexuality, because that's not the point of this relationship. The knight saw that overt sexuality was coarse, it was crass, it was beneath them. This goes with the nice guy kind of a situation. Respect all women. Oh, I don't have those feelings for those women. I wouldn't debase our love with pure carnality. I mean, that exists today, right? So one thing you have to understand is at the core of romantic idealization in love is unobtainability. Because you actually want to set as your ideal love that which cannot be achieved so that you can play the game that you love to play for as long as possible. And that's what romance is all about. It's about playing a game, because back in the day, life was probably very boring. And many of these women were married to other men who were off on crusades for 10, 15, 20 years. And there they are, alone in the castle. There's not much to do. And so this was a game that these women who were left behind and the knights who didn't go could play with each other without getting into trouble to pass the tedium of the days. And if for whatever reason they were able to actually achieve each other, they'd have to find some other game, and maybe they were out of ideas. So they want the game to go on for as long as possible. And one way to do that is to make sure you can never win.
Don't do it.
Another way is to understand that every traditional romance is a tragedy. It's the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet. It's the tragedy of Tristan and Isolde. That is not an accident. Tragedy is baked in as an essential feature to romance. This is why. The idea here is no matter how close I get to the loved one, I can still feel an inseparable gulf between me and her, because we are still two spirits in two bodies. And even if we're in an eternal carnal embrace, I'm aware of my separateness and my essential isolation in the universe. and that's intolerable to the loved one, and to the lover. So the idea here is that it's only in death that the lovers can finally meld together and be one forever, because it's the melting of the physical obstruction that prevents that deep and permanent coupling. Death, from the romantic perspective, is not the end. It's actually the beginning of the union that the lovers have been moving towards the entire narrative of the story. Now, do the lovers know this consciously? Sometimes they seem to, but most of the time they don't. And their decisions tend in a direction to bring that tragedy down upon them. Now, I would also say that romance is a game that, like, the knights would play, the chivalric knights, right? The kings didn't play this game. The knights played this game. Why didn't the kings play this game? Well, in so many words, the kings didn't play this game because the kings didn't fucking have to. So let's think about, like, every Hallmark movie, like the stereotypical romantic comedy that comes out every Christmas. Why is it never the rich, successful, high-status stockbroker who believes in love and the small-town bumpkin who's kind of down on his luck, who thinks love is bullshit? That would never happen because there's no dramatic tension here. The woman, of course, will choose the first guy who has pretty much everything that she could possibly want. So the fact of the matter is that women tend to choose men. Well, we kind of know. They choose them based on lifestyle. They choose them because they can improve their station, for protection, for provision, for the genetics. If you're a king, you don't have to have as much game. You're the highest status person in the realm. Women are going to want to be in a relationship with you all over the kingdom. That's why I think Solomon had 500 wives and 700 concubines. It's like, I don't think it's because he was chatting girls up at the local bars every night. I think the women were beating a path to his castle to try to be in his good graces, right? So once you have the things that women really want and base their selection of men upon, you can dispense with some of the other things. Now, that's why in these movies, it's always the rich, successful stockbroker who bah humbug Christmas in love, and I don't have time for that bullshit, and the guy who doesn't have much, but man, does he loves you really and deeply and sincerely. And he has to do that because what the fuck else does this guy have to offer? Like let's be real. And so my personal theory is that romance is a way that lower status guys can try to compete with higher status guys for the women they want to fuck. Because the fact of the matter is that women haven't changed all that much in the last 2,500 years. They still want to marry and fuck Solomon. They still want to live in the castle. They still want the king. And if one guy can bogart 1,200 women all by himself, like, the other guys around him have to get pretty creative. And they can't beat him at any of the things that he has. They can't beat him on having more money, having more power, having a better lifestyle. Like, that's automatic defeat, right? So what they had to do is basically invent something, which is romantic love, which, you used to work in advertising. So much of romantic love is advertising. It's creating value out of nothing. Because if I have this thing, if I can convince you that I have this really valuable thing that the king doesn't, that you want, then I actually might have a chance to compete with the king. The fact of the matter is, though, is that that kind of romantic love doesn't do much instrumental good to women. And so this bamboozling doesn't work on most women. They'll think it's sweet. They'll think, oh, they'll take the flowers. You know, they'll go out to the nice dinner. They won't fuck that guy. They certainly won't marry him if they have any better options. But they might think it's very sweet. And I wish I could find a guy like you. And I wish more guys were like you. I wonder why they're not.
And I wish you had money like the king.
And I wish that you didn't, and that you treated me like the king, which, oh, it's going to be so hard to say, but you're just a number. So, yeah.
What is the most dangerous thing for a romantic relationship? I heard you say success.
Yeah. Yeah, so oftentimes relationships can and do fail when one person is struggling.
If you want to take your jacket off.
Sure. And especially when it's the man. If the man loses his job or gets hit upon some hard times, the woman might not leave immediately, but the clock is generally ticking. However, if that woman is smart, this guy is actually, I had this thought the other day. And women fuck this all the time, just like people fuck this up all the time in the stock market. You want to buy low and sell high, women. You want to buy low and sell high. Sidebar, I have been left by many women in my life over the years. No woman has ever left me when I was doing well. Ever. So men, the best defense to keep a woman in your life is constant growth and success, which we know is impossible because no man's trajectory is constant, gentle slope up and to the right. There's lots of ups and downs, but a woman has never left me when my life was going well, my life was improving, when success was coming, ever. They always leave when I hit a rough patch, and I always bounce back, but this is the worst time to leave me because you've actually invested all of that time in that relationship up until that point. And when did you cash out? At my lowest, when you're likely to get the least?
You did a couple of great talks. One is on how men should look for ugly ducklings and women should look for
a dark horse.
A dark horse.
And at this point, when a woman leaves, women, they should have their head on a swivel, looking around, because a guy who's fallen on some temporary hard times is like a good stock at a discount. But it takes balls to be able to go there. It takes balls to buy when everyone else is selling. But that's exactly when you fucking have to buy if you actually want to win at the stock market.
Because in 3 years when he's on top.
Absolutely. You got in on that relationship at a discount. And if you waited until he was back on his horse and back on top, he might not give you the time of fucking day because he now has optionality up the ass. Now, a lot of women push back and say, okay, well, there's no point in doing that, Orion, because once he gets successful, he'll just leave you for someone hotter and younger anyway. And I'm like, that's a possibility. That could happen, women, but you have to understand, listen carefully, that it's always easier to keep a castle than to take a castle. Like, defense always has a slight advantage over offense. So just like if you have a hot woman, guys are always going to hit on her. Guys are going to shoot their shot, even if you're married. That's not going to stop a guy. So the only way that you can stop men from trying to poach your women is to get with ugly women. That's the only way to prevent men from not trying to poach your women, is to have ugly women in your life.
Really?
Because if you have a decent looking woman, men are going to try to take her from you. That's just how it is. Now, whether or not she goes with them or stays with you has to do with, are you her best option? Are you on your game? Are you maintaining frame? Etc., etc., etc. But guys will always try to poach as long as she's hot. By the same token, women, if your man is successful, women will try to seduce him away from you. You can't let that happen. But if you have him, it's easier to keep him and to defend the castle from the inside than to be one of those bitches on the outside who's trying to take that guy once he's successful. So that's my response to those women, is that yes, once the guy gets really successful, he might leave you, but your best chance of staying with him is actually already having him. There's no guarantees, but if you think that you can wait until he's successful and he's going to choose you over the 1,000 other women that he can get, I don't share the same rosy prognosis as you do. So women, keep your head on the swivel for the guy who's temporarily a little down and out, because he's going to bounce back and you will have bought a stock that might go to the moon. Okay? So to answer your question, hard times can destabilize relationships, but actually they can also bring people closer together. One thing that surprises a lot of people is that there are more suicides in a society in a period of economic boom than an economic depression. This was discovered by the sociologist Emil Durkheim in his 19th century work Suicide, which is a fascinating examination of what we used to think is just a purely individual intrapsychic phenomenon, the individual's decision to kill him or herself, is actually very strongly predictable when you examine certain social forces. And the social force that Durkheim said is most responsible for suicide is something called anomie, which can functionally be translated as like boundarylessness. It's like when all of the structures and the obstructions that previously kept life intact and in place dissolve, and life almost seems like an infinitely receding horizon. That's the same token why men who are divorced tend to kill themselves far more often than men who are married. And his argument for that is when a man gets divorced, he rediscovers optionality, and he's like, I can go in any different direction. I can have dozens or hundreds, maybe even thousands if you're lucky, of women. I don't have to settle for any of them. And then he kind of gets lost in that. And he loses himself, he loses his direction, and his life begins to fall apart. Same thing with economic boom. When there's an economic downturn, people tend to tighten their belts. They have a shared trial that they can undergo together, and nothing brings people closer together than undergoing shared trials. They have a mutual hope for better days that they can be working towards. So we're all like, we have this superordinate goal we're all on the same page working towards. It can actually create a great deal of harmony and meaning under those circumstances. Not always, obviously, but it can. What tends to destabilize relationships more significantly is when one person starts to succeed or grow and the other person does not. This could look like one person's career just blowing up to a totally different scale. Maybe this person now has a national or international reputation. That's going to make things very difficult.
Changes the whole dynamics of the relationship.
It could be that one person has decided, no, I don't want to just sit on the couch with you every night and watch Netflix. I'm going to take care of my health. And that person starts to go to the gym and run and lose weight, and the other person is still snacking and sitting there. And there's a widening gulf between these two people. And what often can happen, unfortunately, is the person who's not growing, the person who's not succeeding, is threatened by the growth and success of the other partner and tries to sabotage that growth or to in some way control and restrict it, because they might correctly understand that if that growth continues unabated, that person's going to grow right out of that relationship. So these are some of the dark realities that happen every fucking day. Maybe they happened in your household or your parents' households. We don't really talk about them, though, but these are the dark realities that people have to contend with in their families of origin and their actual intimate relationships. Bad things don't always look like bad things. They usually don't. The worst things don't.
What's your view of marriage for both men and women?
It exists. Like, do I believe it? I believe it exists. So,
Is it a good thing for men? And I guess a wealthy man is a different answer than a...
well, as a man, I don't understand what I get from marriage that I can't get without it. And certainly for much less potential risk and downside. So I don't see how it really serves men, to be honest, in today's day and age. I think we can make a distinction between the civic institution of marriage and, let's say, the religious institution of marriage. If you are devout in your path and you feel like this is an important part of your life to make a holy vow in the eyes of God with respect to a specific woman, then I respect that, and you can do that. But you also don't have to get legally married to do that either. So, to my mind, to a woman, getting married is like winning the lottery, because there's very little potential downside. And you get a lot more power and control and leverage in the relationship as well.
If you lose, you win.
Well, that's also something to consider is, do we incentivize divorce by awarding cash and prizes to women for dissolving it? And I say women because we know that women disproportionately initiate the vast majority of divorces. Now, should divorce exist? Absolutely. Yes. Like a world in which divorce under any circumstances whatsoever is not an option is a terrible world. Like, because I don't think anything is more conducive to cultivating abuse of all kinds than any kind of lack of accountability. It's like the biggest abuses in history have come from absolute monarchs or pontiffs who have infallibility and who could not be corrected in their wrongness. It's like, I think that no one should be so safe that they are above reasonable accountability. No one should be so guaranteed in their job position that they can continue to get a salary without working. And certainly to continue to get most of that salary even if they were to quit. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever to me.
As women age, they find themselves facing very different challenges than men as they age.
Yeah.
Tell me about women's timelines regarding having children and what they expect and what they think is going on.
Well, I mean, a number of these things I think everybody understands, everybody knows. We don't like to talk about these things anymore.
A lot of women think they can just wait till they're 40.
Yes, they do. And I think that has to do with a lack of understanding in the IVF process, which is functionally what they would have to rely on at 40 years old. I think the general understanding is that if I throw enough money, science will give me what I want. And I have done many consultations with guys who have gone with their wives through sometimes 10 or more unsuccessful IVF attempts in their late 30s. It costs them hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's painful and uncomfortable for the women. There's no guarantee of success. Correction, there's actually a low guarantee of success. At 40, I think a woman has around a 2 or 3% chance of getting pregnant at any given ovulation, and IVF can raise that to maybe 15 to 20. So that's huge. That's a quintupling of the fertility rate. If I could quintuple my income overnight, I would be overjoyed. I mean, that's not something to scoff at, but it's still 15%. And a lot of these couples, they end up breaking up or getting divorced as a consequence. Childlessness is the second leading cause of divorce and separation around the world, historically. So it's like you have to kind of think about it. So a lot of women, they want to have 2 kids, okay? So let's say that 40 is a pretty hard line in the sand. Like, is it possible to get pregnant after 40? Yes, you need to have some money, you need to have some science, and you need to have some fairy dust. So you kind of want to have your second child at 39, which means you got to get pregnant at 38, which means you got to have your first one at 37, which means you got to get pregnant with that one at 36. And even if you jump right into marriage and you get pregnant the next day, it's like you're probably going to get married at 35. Most people, if they want a wedding, they plan that for at least a year. So they get engaged at 34. Most people get engaged to people that they date at least for a couple of years. Like I've known people who got married after a few weeks. It never worked out well. I would not recommend it. So I would think that you'd want to date for at least a year before you make a lifelong commitment to somebody and decide to bring children into the world that you're going to be responsible for the next 2 decades. So now you're at 33, 32? So I mention this because I think I was doing a consultation with a woman who was 31, and she wanted to have 2 kids. And she said that she had plenty of time because she thought that she had until 40. She thought that she had 9 years to figure it out. But if you do that very simplified math, she didn't have 9 years, she had like 9 months to meet the guy that she could date for a year before he proposed so they can have a wedding and then have their first kid and then recover and have this. It's like you can't really compress that. You certainly can't compress the biological components of that timeline. You could like elope and not get married. That could be a great use of your money anyway, but you don't need to have a wedding. You could roll the dice and only date somebody for a month or 2 before you decide to get pregnant or elope. But that time has to come out of somewhere. So the idea that I have plenty of time is very dangerous. And even more dangerous was the fact that this was actually a very attractive woman that I was talking to. And even more dangerous for her, she had a high status profession. She was a medical doctor. I've dated some women who are medical doctors. They are very difficult to date. We can talk about that potentially another time. But this was a beautiful, successful, high status woman who is 31, who has just crossed the threshold where her sexual marketplace value is going to become lower than many of the men that she's going to start to deal with. Now, because she was high status and because she was attractive, she was not an average woman, right? So let's be fair. A lot of guys can be inappropriately harsh towards women. It's like once they turn 30, they're not attractive. And that's not true. Some women can be attractive in their 40s and beyond, very much so.
Absolutely.
But that is not the norm. That's not standard. Every woman thinks that she's going to be the exception. It's safer to assume that you're not. So the key here is most women use their 20s to either have fun, travel the world, go to a bunch of parties and clubs, explore their sexuality, have fun, or to invest in their careers and to get postgraduate degrees and well-paying jobs, etc., etc. And then once they get that figured out, they turn towards the idea of starting a family. They're acting kind of like men in the sense of men need to build the ship. Men need to kind of have that stable lifestyle in place before they say, okay, I'm ready to take on a woman, I'm ready to take on kids. For better or for worse, women don't actually have to do that to win in the game of mating and dating. In fact, they have their best chance of winning, of being selected, when they're young and most attractive and fertile, with low body counts as well. So all those master's degrees and the prestigious positions and the fact that you're well-traveled, that doesn't really matter to a lot of guys. I think that's, again, a failure of intersexual understanding, where those are things that women tend to be attracted to in men, and so they think, oh, then if I do those things, men will be attracted to me as well, and it doesn't really work that way. By the same token, I think a lot of guys really prioritize the physicality and appearance of women, and what we've seen actually is a big swing in men towards vanity, towards the kind of calorie counting that, even just 10 or 15 years ago, I think only women would do, for better or for worse. I watched a podcast recently that said that body dysmorphia in men was set to overtake body dysmorphia in women in the next year or two. And I think that's, again, a failure of intersexual understanding, which is, if I can get the optics right, the physicality right, because that's what's so important to me, then the women are going to come to me.
Yeah, this is where a better understanding of what men and women are attracted to is helpful.
Yeah, and it's not the same.
It's not the same.
It's not the same at all.
Our world has changed so much. Technology's, kind of made so many things different than they used to be. Are we exposed to too many options and choices in today's world? Were we better off when we lived in small communities?
I don't think so.
Were there only a dozen partners? And
no, I don't. I think it's very dangerous to romanticize that past. Like, my grandparents met because my grandmother, I think, was one of the 3 women of marrying age in that village. I love my grandmother to death. She was a wonderful person. But I'd rather have more optionality than just the 3 women I happen to have the accident of being born next to, and then to live together for the rest of our lives. One, because it wasn't possible really to have sex prior to commitment. So that's another thing that I think we romanticize about the past, is a lot of these relationships that lasted for 60, 70 years, they were horny teenagers who wanted to fuck. And the only way that they could do that was to get married. And they would have gotten divorced 50 years ago if divorce was an option. In fact, my grandparents got divorced in their 60s when they finally emigrated to the United States, and divorce became an option for them. And my grandmother says that's when her life began, at 60, when she got divorced. So we don't want to necessarily romanticize relationships that stayed together forever, that were fundamentally predicated on a lack of optionality and an impossibility of dissolution. So can too much optionality have a negative impact on people? Absolutely. But I think that's a better problem to have than too little, and people can learn how to operate within that optionality successfully. The real issue in today's day and age is that relationships they're going down. It's like the marriage rate today is 50% of what it was in 1970. It has never been lower in the history of the United States than it is today, the marriage rate. The divorce rate was higher in the 80s, but it's still very high. I think the divorce rate in the United States is the highest it is in the world. It's about 50% higher than the runner-up for that dubious position, which is South Korea. Fewer people have friends. Like, in the last 10 or 20 years, 4 times now as many Americans as a couple decades ago don't even have a single close friend or confidant. We're a very lonely generation. And very interestingly, people aren't even having sex and hooking up like they used to. According to the social survey data that just came out recently, 1 in 3 men under 30 have not had sex in the last 12 months, which means that 1 in 3 men are functionally invisible in the sexual marketplace. That's baffling. That's baffling because under 30, that's the 18 to 30. That's generally when people meet and find their mates. Remember, the average age of marriage in this country, first marriage anyway, is 29 for a man and 28 for a woman. So that 1 in 3 men is virtually invisible in this key window of his reproductive life can't possibly bode well for anyone. Okay? So why is this? Why is it just because people have too many options? I don't think so. It's a really complicated situation. Part of the reason, however, has to do with the fact that women are doing so well relative to men. Especially in the demographic under 30, more women graduate high school than men, undergraduate college, more women have graduate degrees than men. I think for the first time in human history, a childless woman under 30 is out-earning childless men under 30. It's only by like 2 percentage points, but it's a tidal change in the history of the world as far as I understand. And this is problematic because women mate and date hypergamously. Like they want a relationship to improve their situation, not just to improve kind of slightly. That's where the marginal economics here comes into play. Like most women kind of are going to be enthusiastic about marriage and a relationship if that relationship can significantly improve her quality of life, which generally means something on the terms of an order of magnitude, like a 0. Now, if a woman is making $100,000 a year, an order of magnitude for a guy is $1 million. It's hard enough for a guy to make $100,000. But if a woman isn't even really going to consider him until he's making $500,000 or more, how many men out there have that kind of money? How many of them are single? And how many of those single men are enjoying unprecedented optionality with these women and have no fucking interest in settling down with any of them because they are now just enjoying being the king of the diving board, as it were. So women's success has the unintended consequence that it's making society more polygamous because more and more of all the sexual optionality is being concentrated into fewer and fewer of the men. And this is not something that men are doing because, again, most of the men are having less and less sex. So if this is a conspiracy by men to make society more polygamous, men are fucking up because more men are having less sex than has ever happened in recorded history. So this is happening because on an unconscious population level through women's sexual selection criteria, where there's just a dwindling pool of potential mates for women. And the intrasexual competition for those few men is fierce. And the vast majority, at any given moment, at least some of those men are never going to be interested in settling down so long as they can go to a different restaurant every night, as it were. So this is creating some difficulties in our society. There's a couple other things. Do you mind if I continue?
No, go ahead.
So remember how I started off this conversation, that my fundamental premise in my book is that relationships are the medium in which value is transacted. What that actually means is that people don't really want relationships. They want value. Relationships are the means to the end of value, to get what they want or need. And relationships are a solution to achieving those goals. What that means, in economic terms, is that if people could get what they want or need more cheaply, more safely, and more easily than by entering into relationships with other people, they will do that. And that's precisely what we are seeing. In today's day and age, it's cheaper, easier, and safer to get what you want, what you would historically get in a relationship with another human being in other ways. Okay? And this is especially true in the context of the age-old exchange that occurs between men and women, straight men and women, in the sexual marketplace, which is, in broad strokes, that men attempt to exchange resources for sexual opportunity, and women attempt to exchange their sexual opportunity for resources. That's how it works. And resource is like broadly defined. It doesn't just mean money. It can mean attention. It can mean security. It can mean an escape from loneliness. It can mean good dick. It can mean excitement. It can mean et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So and this is exemplified. I did a consultation with a guy a few weeks ago. He got into a fight with his wife, and his wife said something that was very, very cruel and cutting, but was not necessarily false and is emblematic of the time that we lived in. And what she said to this guy in the heat of passion was basically like, I can get what you provide from Tinder and TaskRabbit. And this completely took the wind out of this guy's sails to be reduced in that way, but it could be that she has a point. Like, if in today's day and age, if you're horny, you can have a one-time short-term lover. They're on drip. Well, I like him, but I wish he came in blonde. There he is. Let's get him over here tonight. You need a guy to open your pickle jar, you can have somebody over in your house in 15 minutes to do that. You know what I'm saying? Between all of our technologies and modern conveniences, a lot of the services that we have historically discharged for each other in our relationships can be outsourced more cheaply than what is required to maintain a long-term relationship. It's the same reason why successful men have used prostitutes since the dawn of time. Successful men use prostitutes not because they can't get women. It's because courting women in the way that non-successful men do is prohibitively expensive. If my time is worth $2,000 an hour, you think I'm going to drive into town, sit down with you, who could be a nobody or just somebody I met online. I have to buy you drinks, buy you dinner, listen to your story, be charming, maybe pretend to care, and then potentially guide the interaction in the direction of a sexual experience which you could just reject and deny. So the opportunity cost associated with this is extreme for a successful man. Like, this is 4 to 5 hours of his time potentially to get there, to do the date, to get back. That's almost $8,000-$10,000 worth of value. He might not even get laid. He might not even have gotten what he wanted. And he chose this not because he had nothing better to do. He's a successful man with lots going on. So successful men will throw down $1,000, $2,000 on an escort because it's cheaper. And at least they're ensured of getting what they want, which is the sexual encounter. Do you understand? So again, if people can get what they want more cheaply, more safely, and more easily, in other ways, they're going to do that. No one is going to choose, all things being equal, I want the more expensive option. I want the more risky option. I want the less convenient option. That's not how it is. Now, okay, so this is how it works. There are two big things that are siloing men and women, especially among millennials and Gen Z these days, which is where we see the rate of sexual relationships tanking the most. And they're very gender specific. Like, it's possible for a gender to get sucked into both of these, but that's practically not what we see happen. What we see is that pornography as a whole is trapping men, and social media as a whole seems to be trapping women. And this makes sense given the age-old bartering that goes on in the sexual marketplace. So if men are attempting to exchange resources for sexual opportunity, well, porn doesn't quite give them the sexual opportunity, the real flesh and blood sexual opportunity. But apparently it's close enough to it that it fools enough men. And they will pay through the nose and sit in front of the screen for hours to get that virtual, simulated sexual experience and variety. By the same token, women try to exchange their sexual opportunity for resources. One of the ways that women get siloed off is through social media in general, especially like Instagram. This is because attention to a woman is like sex to a man. Attention to a woman is the most powerful reinforcer for a woman, just like sex is the most powerful reinforcer for a man. This is also why having some sort of clout or fame or reputation is so attractive to women, because if you have the spotlight on you, she can vicariously participate in that attention. If she can insinuate herself next to you, she can participate in that attention as well. Are we good on time?
All good.
Great.
No, my flight got delayed 3 hours.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the weather is terrible today. Huh? So a lot of women are outsourcing their needs for attention, for validation, for approval that they might have gotten from their husbands or boyfriends to the male population at large. Now, is that the same thing as actual emotional care that you might receive in a relationship? No, just like porn is not the same thing as an actual sexual experience, but it must be close enough to ensnare a sizable proportion of women. And then you get to the more sexualized aspects of social media with things like OnlyFans, right? And this is amazing because this definitely makes it safer. A woman doesn't even have to have sex anymore. A prostitute actually has to have sex with her client. A woman on OnlyFans doesn't. No one is going to touch her because no one's even in the fucking room with her. She can also use technological leverage to reproduce her one sexual opportunity to millions of men. Whoa, okay. What does this mean? This means, for potentially the first time in human history, it might be easier for the average woman to get $1 from a million men than $1 million from one man. Women still want a millionaire. They still, in the sense that they still want $1 million. Like, that has never changed. The impulse is still the same. Just like in my grandmother and great-grandmother's generation, how do I get that millionaire to notice me? That's the ticket to Easy Street, right? That's still alive. It's just, so the goal is the same, but the strategy has shifted. There are more disenfranchised, lonely, horny men out there than there are millionaires. It will be easier to take $1 from each of those men in exchange for my simulated reproduced sexual opportunity than to try to attract and maintain a relationship with a millionaire. I also don't have to deal with any of my intersexual competition as well, either in the attraction phase or in the maintenance phase of that relationship, which I think is just fascinating. It's fascinating that we're living in that day and age.
And a young girl, teenager even, 18.
Well, sure. And I think a lot of these girls, what they'll do is they'll
be a millionaire.
Try that out. They'll try to get as much as they can, as fast as they can, for as long as they can. And then when they start to age out of that, which they will, they try to find a guy to wife them up. And they switch their strategies. And a lot of guys might say, well, that's disgusting. I'm not going to have a woman who's paraded her body on the internet for years as my wife. Okay, fair enough. There's a man out there who will marry her.
Sure. Some guys probably prefer that.
It's possible.
Yeah.
There's a preference for everything that exists out there.
What's the one bit of short advice you can give to both men and women in this day and age?
The best dating advice I've ever received, and I think it's good for both men and women. It's one of my mentors, and he told me, Orion, the key to relationships is high hopes and low expectations. High hopes and low expectations. I think that is the truth. And it's the truth for a number of different ways. A lot of the reasons why people get hurt in the courtship and in the relationship process is they get ahead of themselves. So one thing that I teach guys is to never expect past the present moment, which is if you're using apps, for instance, if you swipe, don't expect you're going to match. If you match and you text her, don't expect that she's going to respond. If she responds, don't expect that she's going to give you her phone number. If she gives you her phone number, don't expect that she'll respond there. If you set a date, don't expect that she'll show up. If she shows up, don't expect you're going to have sex. If you have sex, don't expect you're ever going to see her again, etc., etc., etc. The hard thing about that is that some guys have so little optionality with women, and they have so much hunger. They have, and I don't mean that like in a condescending way. Like certainly guys can be desperate and horny, but there's this real authentic need in men to connect with women. And it can be excruciating to a man when he, for whatever reason, isn't able to succeed in doing that. And those feelings can get the better of that guy and cause him to get ahead of himself. And then he ends up kind of breaking his own heart, which is always kind of what happens, is he starts to dream and fantasize a little bit beyond reality, both on the terms of this relationship and who this woman is. And then if at any stage of this process the attrition happens, he's hurt because he built up an expectation in his mind that was not fulfilled. It's also, I think, important for both men and women, to the extent that they can, to really heal themselves with respect to their emotional wounding. I think I said that, I don't know, was this off camera or not? But a lot of what people mistake for love is actually just the experience of familiarity.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier.
Okay, I wasn't crazy. So, and what does that mean? It means that we all have certain templates for how love feels and what relationships look like that were unconsciously cultivated in us in our families of origin. And we don't, as children and adolescents, really question those models. We don't yet have the critical, independent thought capable of doing that. That comes much later, and even when it arrives, some people still don't do it, right? Or it's too late. They've already gotten involved with the wrong person. But if you were fortunate enough to have a secure household with parents who stayed together and were warm and loving and respectful and peaceful, congratulations. That's fantastic. So your template is going to resonate with men or women that you can replicate that kind of relationship with, which is generally great for long-term stability. Maybe it's a little boring, but it's boring that tends to go the distance. Exciting generally fizzles out. However, if you're like me, if you're like a lot of the people I work with, you weren't that fortunate to be born in that situation, and you likely grew up thinking that your model, if you're even aware of having a model of relationships or love as such, was what love and relationships were supposed to look like. And you might have had an experience of getting involved with one chaotic train wreck of a woman after another, or one toxic, exploitative, narcissistic man after the other. It's like, pick your gender, it happens to both men and women. And this is because there was something in that person that reminded you of a dynamic that existed in your family of origin. the love and attraction you felt was actually misrecognized familiarity. And I don't know how, but you figured out that there was something about this person that would allow you to replicate that dynamic. Freud called this the repetition compulsion. Have you heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
You know about the repetition compulsion?
All right, I've heard it.
It happened, he talked about it in terms of therapy, which is basically that he noticed that patients would tend over time to have the same problems with him, the therapist, that they talk about having with like their parents or their lovers or the people who aren't in their room. But the way I'm using the repetition compulsion, it has to do with I am going to unconsciously seek out women who remind me of this relationship dynamic that feels familiar because it was ingrained in me from my childhood. And I'm compelled to do that for a good reason, but a tragic reason. The good reason and the tragic reason are the same as what Freud theorized, which is basically like, I want to seek it out so that I can change it. It was a bad, unfulfilling, abusive, or chaotic childhood. So what I want to do is I want to reattract somebody who feels the same as that and write a different ending. I didn't like how that story ended. So I'm going to get into the same story and write a new ending out of it. Yeah, that's the ticket. And that's going to be my closure and my happily ever after all in one fell swoop.
I think that's what we all do.
We do it until we don't. We repeat until we remember. That's a quote from Freud. That's a great quote. The tragic nature of this is you don't fucking know how to write another ending. You've never done that. All you ever known is the way the story has been written. You can't do something you don't know how to do. So a lot of people go into this, potentially even with good intentions and high hopes, but they don't yet have the skills, the resilience, the interpersonal strategies to rewrite a new narrative with the person who feels familiar. And so, of course, they end up recapitulating that dynamic, and it tends towards chaos and conflict and dissolution, etc. And then if you're not careful, you think, oh, all women are crazy, or all guys are dogs, or whatever it is. And that's not true. But it could be that all the women you're choosing are crazy, and it could be all the men you're choosing are dogs, and what do those equations have in common?
You picked them.
You picked them, which means on some level you're a bit crazy yourself.
All right. Orion Taraban, thank you so much. I think you're going to become a regular with me.
I had a great time.
Yeah,
this was a lot of fun. Thanks for letting me just riff.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite videos already.
Fantastic.
These last two.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. Really just fucking amazing.
Awesome, dude.